Hi, Sarah. Great chat there. Um, it's always a pleasure. Um, and I know we overrun slightly. I think the break was officially at 1/2 past, but it was worth it for the demo. And I love GitLab. It's probably my next one that I've got a feeling it will be acquired, not during the VCD days like Slack was, but definitely it's the next on the hit list. So we've got a few questions. Let me just wander over to the board. So we've got the questions up in the virtual world. So the first question we've got is it necessary to have microservices architecture to move to the cloud?
Okay, so it's not necessary. You can rent any size machine in the cloud, but if you're looking for efficiency, which is, as I was saying, one of the main goals of moving to the cloud, then you really need your application to be able to use the minimum processing power possible. And so the point of microservices is that each individual service can be scaled up and down with demand. So if you didn't have a microservice architecture, you would have to scale the whole thing and you wouldn't really get those efficiency savings. But it's not necessary as such. So you could move anything.
Awesome. And so the next one is from Monica, who's been listening, and she says, how challenging is it to follow a DevOps journey, cloud to cloud native, in companies which you've worked with? So, could you talk about maybe an example there for how difficult is it to get to cloud native?
Yeah, okay. I suppose most of the projects that we've worked on have been as consultants, we've worked with multiple different teams and there's been multiple sort of different drivers behind it. So I think the difficulty has really, in a large company, been trying to have a single drive as to what your goal is. So, you might have a brilliant operations team that completely streamlines one portion and have an idea of where they want to go. But then the dev team has a completely different idea of what things should look like. So it's really aligning everybody with the same goals. And I think the way to solve that is to really look at defining achievable targets before you try to go cloud native. Sort of say, well, what are our goals? Is it cost saving? In which case, how can we prove that the steps we've taken are moving us along the right lines? So if you have small measurable goals, then you can hopefully reach your target. But if you just sort of go, yeah, we're going cloud native, you won't necessarily gain anything by doing that. And especially if you have a big company with multiple different teams, you have to make sure that you're all on the same page as to why you're doing this.
No, and to be honest, I wish Capgemini was helping us. I'm doing a migration to AWS at the moment for an Italian company, or it's actually a Japanese company that does mobile payment gateways, and it's not as easy as it sounds, is it? When you're talking about going from whatever architecture they've got to cloud. And I know you talked about some great stuff around Kafka and some of these new technologies. And I guess this next question comes in around serverless architecture. That obviously analysts, I know Forrester had a bit of a pop about, with no ops we don't need operations. So would you recommend moving to maybe that kind of serverless architecture?
Yeah, so I suppose in the perfect world, serverless architecture is the goal, because that's the state in which you don't care about deployment at all. You've got maximum efficiency because you're leaving everything up to your service provider and you know exactly what it's costing you. But if you are looking to migrate, or even if you're looking to build from scratch, you have to remember that a serverless function is just one function of your application, and how on earth you get all of those functions to coordinate is the big difficulty in serverless architectures. And then each cloud platform will have their own kind of recommendation of how you do this, which then would tie you into the platform, which is not what everybody particularly wants. It's a worry of a lot of businesses, isn't it? So while it is the goal, it may not be realistic. And so what we've seen a lot of people do is just use serverless functions for the peripherals around the edge of their architecture. If they've got some specific logging they want to do, they might build that as a serverless function. But keeping overall control of the architecture by building microservices and deploying them is a more possible way to move to the cloud.
No, and I think that's a great example as well. And I love kind of your diagram around kind of pods and making it agnostic so it could move between clouds. I think, that is a really great way of looking at it. And I guess Monica's asking another question. I'm going to slightly twist it based on I'd like an answer because I'm stuck with this at the moment. But we're doing VMC, and so we're obviously we're migrating VMC into the cloud, into AWS. And part of it is that virtualization point of view where you're migrating servers and capabilities to your target cloud vendor. A lot of people are quite used to virtual machines now, and they, especially with the COVID, people are doing secure desktop on demands for their normal work. Do you see this kind of difference between kind of cloud native building for cloud and then kind of this retrofitting kind of VMC, move your VMs into the cloud and host them there? Is there that much? Is there a long way to go on that cloud journey? That's what I was kind of wanting to ask.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I think a lot of our clients have actually been very happy to completely move paradigms, to move away from the concept of the machine, virtual or otherwise, and to move towards the idea of renting functionality. So I think perhaps it is a big leap, but perhaps clients wouldn't come to us until they're ready to make that leap, and that's why we haven't really experienced so much of the difference between the two. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Maybe it is such a big shift that we won't see people making it. Maybe they would just stay with their virtual machine level of abstraction until they build again. So yeah, it's a good point, and it is I suppose probably a bigger issue than I realized because I don't see it very often.
I must admit, we get it. We've had actually, I've been trying to sort production issues out today with CloudFront, right? And part of it is we're moving to the cloud, and then we're looking at using cloud native functionality, which makes sense, right? Like Amazon load balancing and everything else. And then there's not as enterprise grade functionality, so then we're falling back to using F5 or using our own internal enterprise tools because operations have grown with all of, and you talked about kind of security and all these other kind of areas. They've got all these really quite impressive firewall rules or 0-day tolerances, that kind of they've built over time, and then moving it to a cloud vendor and then having to which doesn't have the same kind of functionality. It's a mapping exercise. And so do you find with your clients that this
you
is
see the contracts, and the contract says 99% uptime, and you're like, oh, that sounds pretty good, but then you forget that means 1 hour out of every 100 your application is going to be down. It is a bit of a shock for people, isn't it, when they come to that? And obviously it's something that you have to architect for from scratch, and yeah, that's a big leap.
Absolutely. And it's a cost thing as well. I've seen companies move back to to Rackspace or something because they're offering them amazing deals, then go to AWS, then come back and move over to Microsoft because they're got a fantastic deal for them. And I guess the architecture that you're building for that cloud native one allows for that flow between those different kind of options, so they can take advantage of those deals.
Yeah,
but it is amazing. Just I looked at the bill for a server farm versus AWS, and it looks great until then you start looking at availability zones and then data between those availability zones if you've got Kafka or something, and suddenly it eventually comes up to that point where you're thinking, what, I should have asked Capgemini something to model it all out so they understand where the savings are, and then to work out those little bits which you get caught because you're not aware that that's going to have an associated cost with. So I guess that hybrid cloud is still nearly there, isn't it, where there's some stuff that may be better to host internally or on a provider like yourself who do private cloud.
Yeah, and that comes back to the point, doesn't it, of making sure that you have those goals before you set out on the journey. Because as you say, you might find if your goal is to, minimize infrastructure for Kafka, it may not be that AWS is the answer. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't know this one, so I'm going to ask you. But they said so. The terraforming you were talking about, infrastructure as code, it's available for other cloud vendors apart from AWS.
Yeah. There's libraries certainly for Google and for Azure. So that that have these concepts of these are the Azure concepts that I want to build, and you can just specify them and detail them out. Presumably the libraries built by the cloud providers.
No, that was wonderful. Well, thanks again, Sarah. Hopefully you're going to join us for the live panel, technical panel at the end. It's been an absolute pleasure. Again, I love your talk. So thanks so much. And we're now going to go into the break. So thanks, Sarah.